The night it happened, Damon Carter was just trying to keep the lights on. It was past midnight, the rain was coming down in sheets, and he had one delivery left, a bundle of red roses to room 1820 of the Ashford Grand, the most expensive hotel in the city. His phone screen was cracked and half dark from the water. He misread the number. He knocked on the wrong door. The woman who opened it was not a newlywed. She was not waiting for anyone. She was Vivian Ashford, 36 years old, owner of the hotel he was standing in, worth more money than Damon would earn in 100 lifetimes. She was wearing a silk robe. Her eyes were red. Downstairs, 400 people were celebrating her birthday without her. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. What happened in the next 40 minutes would be twisted into a scandal by morning. A wrong room, a bouquet of roses, a conversation no one was supposed to witness. And 62 days later, she would marry him. If you're new here, stories like this one are what this channel is about. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's get into it. Damon Carter woke up every morning at 6, made breakfast for his daughter, packed her lunch, walked her to the bus stop, and then figured out the rest of the day from there. That was the routine. That was what kept things moving. His daughter's name was Zoe. She was 8 years old, missing one front tooth, and obsessed with drawing. Every flat surface in their apartment had been claimed at some point. The kitchen table, the back of grocery receipts, the inside covers of her school notebooks. She drew princesses mostly, but also dogs, stars, and occasionally, her mother always placed high up in the picture, always surrounded by light. Renee had died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. Zoe had been 6. Damon had held it together long enough to plan the funeral, notify the school, and cancel the joint bank account. After that, he allowed himself one night, just one, before deciding that falling apart was something he could not afford. He worked days doing odd jobs, moving furniture, painting walls, fixing whatever needed fixing. At night, he delivered flowers for a small shop called Petal and Post. The night shift paid extra. He needed the extra. He was a black man doing service work in luxury hotels, and he knew what that meant in practice. Security guards who asked for his ID twice. Elevator doors that closed a half-second faster when he was the one approaching. He did not complain. He had learned early that complaining cost energy he did not have, and energy was a currency he budgeted carefully. Vivian Ashford had a different kind of exhaustion. Hers came from rooms that were too large and calendars that were too full. From smiling at cameras for brands she had built with her own hands, then going home to a penthouse that echoed. She had inherited the foundation of Ashford Group from her father, but she had grown it herself. 12 hotels across 7 cities, a name that appeared on the covers of business magazines beside words like visionary and formidable. What those magazines never printed 18 months ago, the man she planned to marry had sold their private correspondence to a tabloid for 6 figures. Every vulnerable thing she had ever said to him, packaged and priced. After that, Vivian stopped letting people in. It was a simple solution. It worked. Inside the company, her uncle Gerald Ashford, vice chairman of the board, had been watching her with the patient attention of a man who had been waiting for a long time. He smiled at the right moments. He agreed in meetings and maneuvered in hallways. He was the kind of man who never needed to rush. He simply waited for the opening. Tonight, standing alone in her suite while 400 people celebrated her birthday 40 floors below, Vivian was too tired to pretend she wasn't lonely. The elevator opened on the 18th floor, and Damon stepped out into a hallway that smelled like cedar and money. He checked his phone. Room 1820. The screen flickered, water had gotten into the crack along the side, and the display kept dimming at the edges. He squinted at the number, turned left, and walked to the end of the hall. The door in front of him read 1802. He looked at it for a moment, decided the lighting was bad, and knocked. Silence. Then the soft sound of movement behind the door. When it opened, Damon's first instinct was to apologize, not because he had done anything wrong yet, but because something about the woman standing in the doorway made him feel like he had interrupted something private. She was tall, wearing a cream silk robe, her dark hair pulled back loosely. Her eyes were the kind of red that comes from crying alone, not from crying in front of people. She looked at the roses in his hand. He looked at the number on the door. "I think I have the wrong room," he said. She didn't close the door. Vivian had spent the last hour sitting on the edge of the bed in suite 1802, listening to the muffled sound of her own birthday party rising through the floor below. Someone had given a toast she hadn't heard. Someone else had laughed too loudly at something. The party would go on perfectly well without her, which was the part she was trying not to think about. She looked at the man in the doorway, soaking wet, holding red roses, clearly exhausted in the specific way of someone who had been working since before she woke up. He was not looking at her like she was Vivian Ashford. He was looking at her like she was a person who had answered a door, and he was a person who had knocked on the wrong one. "You're not going to find better coffee downstairs," she said. "Come in." He hesitated. She could see him calculating the distance between his world and this room, the strangeness of the invitation, the way nothing about this made practical sense. Then he stepped inside, still holding the roses, and she took them from him and set them on the table without ceremony, like flowers had been arriving all night. She made coffee from the machine on the counter. He stood near the door, jacket dripping quietly onto the marble floor, until she handed him a cup and he sat down. They talked. Not about anything that should have mattered. He told her about Zoe, about how his daughter had asked him that morning whether flowers had feelings and how he hadn't known what to say. Vivian laughed at that. Not the careful laugh she used in meetings, but the kind that arrived before she could decide whether to let it. She told him the party downstairs was for her. He asked if she wanted to be there. She said no. He nodded like that was the most reasonable thing he'd heard all night. After 40 minutes, he stood to leave. At the door, Vivian said, without quite planning to, "Would you want to do this again sometime? Just coffee, somewhere normal." Damon looked at her. Then he looked at the room, the chandelier, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lit up below them. He thought about Zoe asleep in their apartment across town. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said quietly. Not unkindly. He delivered the roses to room 1820 8 minutes later. A photographer in the hallway caught him leaving Vivian's floor at 12:43 in the morning. By 6 a.m., the photo was everywhere. The caption under the photo read, "Vivian Ashford's midnight visitor. Who is he?" By 7 a.m., someone had identified Damon by his delivery bag. By 8, his full name was attached to the photo. By 9, the comment sections had already sorted themselves into two camps, people who thought it was romantic and people who said things Damon had to stop reading after the third one. Another one trying to come up. "You know exactly what he was doing there." Of course. He read those words standing in his kitchen while Zoe ate cereal across the table, her feet swinging above the floor, humming something to herself. He put the phone face down and asked if she wanted more orange juice. "Yes, please," she said without looking up from her drawing. He poured the juice. His hands were steady. He was good at that. His boss at Petal & Post called at 9:15 that same morning. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The word "unfortunately" appeared twice. Damon did not argue. He thanked the man for the work, hung up, and sat down at the kitchen table. He had $43 in his checking account. Rent was due in 11 days. He spent the afternoon applying to 3 other delivery positions and a warehouse job across town. 2 of the delivery companies didn't respond. One sent a reply within the hour, a single line, informing him that after reviewing his application, they had decided to move forward with other candidates. He had submitted it 40 minutes ago. They had Googled his name. At Zoe's school pickup that afternoon, a woman he recognized from the parent committee smiled at him with the particular brightness of someone who had something to say. She didn't say it directly. She said, "Quite the week you're having," and laughed lightly and turned to talk to someone else. Damon took Zoe's hand and walked to the car. Inside the Ashford Group's executive floor, Gerald Ashford sat at the head of the conference table and did not bother hiding his satisfaction. He kept it professional, Concern furrowing his brow measured words about brand integrity and public perception. But when Vivian entered the room and he watched her face controlled and unreadable, he allowed himself a small internal adjustment. This was the opening. Finally. "The board would like a statement by end of day," he said. "Something brief. A clarification." Vivian looked at him. "A clarification of what, Gerald?" "That the individual in the photograph has no personal connection to you. That it was a misunderstanding." He slid a single sheet across the table. "Legal has drafted something." She didn't pick it up. "We're not asking you to lie," Gerald continued, his voice smooth with practiced reasonableness. "We're asking you to protect what your father built." The room was quiet. 8 faces around the table, all watching her. She recognized the calculation in some of them, the same math Gerald had been running for years. How many votes did he have? She already knew the answer. So did he. "I'll think about it," she said. She left without touching the statement. In the elevator down to her office, Vivian stood very still and thought about a man sitting in a wet jacket telling her about his daughter and flowers and whether feelings could live inside petals. She thought about how he had looked at her, just looked at her like she was a person in a room, and how long it had been since someone had done that. She had not thought she would miss it so quickly. The warehouse job came through the day after the photo ran. Night shift, 40 minutes across town, less per hour than the flower delivery. Damon said yes before they finished the sentence. He started that Friday. The days in between were the kind of quiet that presses down on you. He made Zoe's lunches, walked her to the bus, came home to an apartment that felt smaller than usual. He submitted more applications. He did not check the news. He told Zoe he was between jobs, which was true, and that everything was fine, which was mostly true, and that she didn't need to worry, which she did anyway. On the second day, he sat down at the kitchen table and did the math again. Rent in 11 days. Groceries. Zoe's school supply list that had been sitting on the counter for 2 weeks. The warehouse job would cover it barely if he was careful, and he had always been careful. He folded the paper, put it in his back pocket, and went to pick up Zoe. She was 8. She noticed things. One evening, she climbed onto the counter while he was washing dishes and sat beside the drying rack watching him. "Are you sad, Dad?" she asked. "No," he said. "Your face is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you're not saying what you're thinking." He handed her a dish towel and told her to dry. She did, still watching him. He kept washing. After a while, she said, "I drew a new picture today. You want to see?" "Yeah," he said, "I do." She showed him after dinner. It was a house, not their apartment, but a house with a yard and a tree and a dog sitting under it. He was in it. So was she. There was a space beside them slightly larger than the others that she hadn't filled in yet. She went to bed without explaining it. 1 week after the photo ran, Vivian drove herself to a coffee shop near Damon's neighborhood. No driver, no assistant, no advance notice. She had gotten the general area from the Petal and Post storefront address. She had walked past it once, following the shop name from the delivery tag on the roses, and she found the nearest coffee shop to that block and sat down with a cup she didn't finish. She had no guarantee he would walk in. She was there anyway. Damon came because Zoe had an enrichment class 2 blocks away, and he had an hour to fill. He pushed open the door of the coffee shop, looked up, and stopped moving. Vivian was sitting at a corner table in a plain gray coat. No jewelry, her hair down. She looked like someone trying not to be recognized, which meant she looked almost like a regular person. She saw him and didn't wave, just waited. He ordered a coffee at the counter, brought it to her table, and sat down. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "What happened affected your work. That wasn't fair." "I found something else," he said. "Good," she paused. "Is it better?" "No." She nodded. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she asked how Zoe was doing, and something shifted. He told her about the drawing, the house with the unfilled space. She listened without interrupting, which he noticed because most people didn't. He asked about her week. She said it had involved a lot of people telling her what to do, which was not unusual, but lately she found it harder to pretend she agreed. He said, "You don't seem like someone who agrees with much." She said, I used to be better at performing it. They stayed for nearly 2 hours. The coffee went cold. She got a refill. He got a second cup. At some point, the conversation stopped being about the scandal or the photo or the apology and became about other things, the way cities sound different at 2 a.m. The last book she'd actually finished, whether it was possible to be good at a job you'd stopped believing in. When he stood to leave, she stood too. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't coming," he said. "I was just nearby." She smiled, not the careful one, the real one. He had seen it once before in a hotel suite in the rain, and he recognized it now in the flat afternoon light of a coffee shop with mismatched chairs. He walked back to pick up Zoe. He thought about looking back. He didn't, but he thought about it. She came on a Tuesday evening holding his jacket. He had left it on the back of the chair at the coffee shop 4 days earlier. It was a thin jacket, the kind that didn't do much against the cold, and he had not gone back for it because going back would have meant admitting he wanted a reason to. Vivian had tracked down the Petal and Post shop owner directly. A brief, straightforward conversation in which she explained who she was, apologized for the disruption the scandal had caused his business, and asked if he had a contact address for Damon. The man, to his credit, had called Damon first to ask if it was okay. Damon had said yes before he'd fully decided why. She stood at the door of his apartment building, holding the jacket folded over one arm, wearing her work clothes, looking slightly uncertain in a way that did not match the version of her that appeared on magazine covers. Damon opened the door before she could knock a second time. He looked at the jacket, then at her. "You could have mailed it," he said. "I know," she said. He stepped aside to let her in. Zoe was on the living room floor with a sheet of paper and 6 different shades of blue. She looked up when Vivian walked in, assessed her with the direct attention that children apply before they learn to be polite about it, and said, "You're the lady from the news." "Zoe," Damon said. "She is, though." Zoe looked at Vivian. "Are you Dad's friend?" Vivian glanced at Damon. "I think so, if that's okay." Zoe considered this for approximately 1 second. "Okay. Do you want to see my drawings?" She did not wait for an answer. She was already on her feet gathering a stack of papers from the corner of the room, presenting them one by one with the seriousness of a gallery curator. A dog in a raincoat, a princess with a broken crown who was still smiling, a family under a sky full of stars, a man, a little girl, and a figure high above them surrounded by light. "That's my mom," Zoe said, pointing to the figure in the sky. "She lives up there now." Vivian looked at the drawing for a moment. "She's surrounded by a lot of light." "That's because she liked the sun," Zoe said simply. Then she flipped to the next drawing, the house with the yard and the tree. The space beside Damon and Zoe was still empty. Zoe picked up a pencil, glanced up at Vivian, and began filling it in. "That's you," she announced, adding quick, confident lines. "You have nice hair. It's hard to draw, but I'll try." Vivian sat very still on the edge of the couch. Damon watched her from across the room and did not say anything because there was nothing to say. After Zoe went to bed, they sat in the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. The apartment was quiet in the way small spaces get quiet at night, not empty, just settled. The refrigerator hummed. The street outside was still. It was the kind of quiet Damon had gotten used to over 2 years of evenings alone, and it felt different now with someone else in it. Not louder, just less empty. Vivian looked around the kitchen the way people look at things when they're trying to understand a life they haven't lived. The drawings stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, the chipped mug on the drying rack, a grocery list in Zoe's handwriting on the back of an envelope mostly legible, with a drawing of a cat at the bottom for reasons no one had explained. "She's remarkable," Vivian said. "Yeah," Damon said, "she is." Vivian told him about Gerald's ultimatum. The statement, the vote, the deadline. She said it without drama, the way she might report a weather forecast. Damon said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I've spent 12 years building something I'm proud of. I don't want to hand it over, but I also don't want to—" She stopped. "Don't want to what?" She looked at him. "Say something I can't take back." He understood that. He had been doing the same calculation since the night he knocked on the wrong door, measuring the distance between what he wanted and what was safe, and choosing safe every time because Zoe was on the other side of that choice. He said, "I'm scared too, in case that matters." She said, "It does." They didn't move closer. They didn't make any promises. But when she left an hour later and he stood in the doorway watching her walk to the elevator, he noticed that the apartment felt different after she was gone. Not smaller, just quieter than it had been before he knew what it felt like with her in it. The photos ran on a Thursday morning. Gerald had hired someone no one would ever prove it, but Vivian knew, and Gerald knew she knew, and neither of them would say so directly because that was how things worked at this level. The images were taken from across the street. Vivian's car parked in front of Damon's building. Vivian at the door. Vivian inside the lobby. Grainy enough to look candid, clear enough to be unmistakable. The caption this time was worse than the first. Ashford heiress makes second visit to delivery man's apartment. Sources say relationship is ongoing. The comment sections reconvened. The language was sharper now, less curious and more certain. Damon's name appeared alongside descriptions that had nothing to do with who he was and everything to do with what certain people had already decided he must be. A few of the phrases were familiar to him in the specific way that certain words are familiar to a black man in America, not because he had heard them directed at him before exactly, but because he had always known they were available, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. He read them once. Then he put the phone in a drawer. Gerald called an emergency board meeting for Friday afternoon. He arrived early, arranged the chairs, and placed a single document at each seat before anyone else entered the room. By the time Vivian walked in, 8 faces were already turned toward her, with expressions ranging from discomfort to poorly concealed anticipation. Gerald stood at the head of the table. "The situation has escalated," he said as though he had nothing to do with the escalation. "Our partners in Seattle have raised concerns. The Meridian deal is at risk. 3 board members have called me personally in the last 24 hours. He paused. "This is no longer a personal matter, Vivian. It is a business matter." He slid the revised document toward her end of the table. The new version included a line describing the initial encounter as an isolated incident involving a hotel service employee, and another confirming that Vivian had no personal relationship of any kind with the individual in question. "We need this signed by Monday," Gerald said. "If it isn't, the board will convene a formal vote of no confidence. I have the numbers, and I think you know that." Vivian looked at the document. She did not pick it up. "I'll let you know," she said. That evening, Zoe came home from school quieter than usual. Damon noticed at dinner. She pushed her food around without eating much, which was not like her. He asked what was wrong. She said nothing. He asked again, and she looked up. "Madison's mom said something today," she said. "At pickup." Damon set down his fork. "What did she say?" Zoe looked at her plate. "She asked me if it was true that you were going to be rich now, because of the lady." She paused. "I didn't know what to say, so I said I didn't know." "That was the right answer," Damon said. Zoe was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is Vivian going to get in trouble because of us?" The question landed somewhere in the middle of his chest and stayed there. "Don't worry about that," he said. "I'm not worried," she said. "I just don't want her to get in trouble. She was nice." Another pause. "And she said my hair drawing looked like her real hair. Most people don't say that." Damon looked at his daughter, 8 years old, missing one front tooth, trying to understand something too large and too adult for her to be carrying, and felt the particular helplessness of a parent who cannot fix the thing that is hurting their child. He cleaned up dinner. He helped Zoe with her homework. He waited until she was asleep. Then he picked up the phone and called Vivian. She picked up on the second ring. "Damon." Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was bracing for something. He had rehearsed this. He had sat at the kitchen table after Zoe fell asleep and gone through the words several times, arranging them into something that sounded like a decision instead of a surrender. He was ready. "We need to stop," he said. A beat of silence. "Stop what?" "This. Whatever this is." He kept his voice level. "The photos, the board, Gerald, all of it is getting worse, and it's not going to get better. Zoe came home tonight and told me another kid's parent asked her if we were going to be rich now. He paused. She's 8. She shouldn't be carrying any of this. I know, Vivian said quietly. And you're about to lose your company, the thing you built, because of a bouquet of flowers that went to the wrong room. That's not why I'd be losing it. It doesn't matter why. The result is the same. He pressed his palm flat against the table. You belong in that building, Vivian. You belong in those rooms making those decisions. I'm a guy who works night shifts to cover rent. Those two things don't go together, they just don't. She didn't respond immediately. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. Do you actually believe that, or are you saying it because it's easier than the alternative? The question hit somewhere he hadn't armored. He stayed with it for a moment, one beat too long, and in that silence she heard the answer he wasn't giving her. Do you want me to go? She asked. Honestly. He closed his eyes. Yes, he said. It was the only lie he had told her. She didn't argue. She didn't cry, or at least she didn't let him hear it. She said, Okay, Damon, in a voice that was so composed it was its own kind of answer. And then the line went quiet. He sat at the table for a long time after. The apartment made its small nighttime sounds, the refrigerator cycling, a car passing outside, Zoe shifting in her sleep down the hall. Everything was exactly as it had been an hour ago. Nothing had changed in any visible way. That was the worst part. The next morning, Zoe retrieved the drawing from her room. The house with the yard, the tree, the dog, the figure she had sketched in beside Damon and herself. She carried it to the kitchen table and sat with it for a while, not drawing, just looking. Then she opened the bottom drawer of the side table in the living room, the one where they kept takeout menus and old birthday cards and things that didn't have another place, and she put the drawing inside. She didn't say anything about it. Damon saw her do it. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hand, and he watched his daughter quietly file away something she had made with hope, because she had understood the way children understand things before they're told that the person in the drawing wasn't coming back. He had told himself he was protecting her. Standing in that doorway, he was no longer sure he knew the difference between protection and loss. The statement was due by Monday at noon. Vivian arrived at the Ashford Group's executive floor at 9 a.m., which was earlier than anyone expected. Her assistant had the document waiting on her desk, weighted down by a pen that someone had placed there deliberately, as though the act of signing needed to be made as frictionless as possible. She sat down. She read through it again slowly, the way you read something you already know by heart, but want to be certain you haven't misunderstood. An isolated incident involving a hotel service employee. No personal relationship of any kind. The Ashford Group remains committed to the highest standards of professional conduct. She set the document down and looked out the window at the city below. It was a gray morning, the kind that couldn't decide whether to rain. 40 floors down, people were moving along the sidewalks in their coats, going wherever they were going, not thinking about any of this. She had built this view. Not literally, the architects had done that, but she had fought for this floor, this office, this position in 100 meetings over 12 years where she had been the youngest person in the room, or the only woman, or both. She knew what it had cost. She had paid it willingly. She thought about the kitchen. The one in Damon's apartment, small enough that you could touch both counters if you stood in the middle and stretched your arms out. The 2 mugs of tea, the particular quality of quiet that existed in a space where someone had been raising a child alone for 2 years and had made the space feel like enough anyway. She thought about Zoe putting the drawing in the drawer. She thought about the grocery list on the back of the envelope, the cat at the bottom drawn in purple crayon for no reason and every reason. She picked up the pen. Gerald arrived at 10:30 with 6 board members behind him. He had timed it late enough to give her the morning to reconsider early enough to apply the final pressure before the deadline. He sat at the head of the table and folded his hands. I trust you've had time to review the statement, he said. I have, she said. And she looked around the table. 8 faces. Some of them uncomfortable, which meant they still had consciences. Some of them blank, which meant they had already voted in their heads. Gerald's face was composed into an expression of neutral concern that had taken him years to perfect. She thought about what he had said 2 weeks ago. "We're asking you to protect what your father built." Her father had built a hotel. She had built a company. There was a difference, and Gerald had never understood it because Gerald had never built anything. He had only ever waited. She stood up. She picked up the statement with both hands and she tore it in half. The sound was very clean in the quiet room. No one spoke. "I've been running this company for 12 years, Vivian said. "I have not made a single major decision in that time that I am ashamed of." She set the two halves of the paper on the table. "Until now would have been the first." She reached into her jacket pocket and placed her executive keycard on the table beside the torn statement. "I'm stepping down from the CEO position effective immediately. I'll retain my shares and board seat." She looked at Gerald. "You'll have what you've been waiting for. I hope it's everything you imagined." Gerald's composure slipped for just a moment. Not into satisfaction, which she had expected, but into something that looked almost like surprise. He had prepared for a fight. The fact that she was leaving on her own terms, calmly, without giving him the confrontation he'd built toward for years, was something he hadn't accounted for. She buttoned her jacket, picked up her bag, and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the parking garage. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were dry. She had one place to be. Damon got the call at 11:47. The school's front office, Mrs. Pellegrino, who he knew by voice because she called whenever Zoe forgot her lunch or came down with a fever. This time she said there was a woman at the front gate asking to see Zoe. She had given her name. She had said she was a friend of the family. She had been waiting for 20 minutes without being asked to leave, which Mrs. Pellegrino conveyed in a tone that suggested this was unusual behavior that she did not entirely disapprove of. Damon drove over from the warehouse, still in his work clothes. He pushed through the front gate and stopped. Vivian was standing on the sidewalk outside the school fence. She was wearing the same suit she'd had on for the board meeting. He could tell from the way she was standing that it had been a long morning. Her hair was slightly wind-pulled from the drive. She had no assistant, no phone in her hand, nothing to do with her hands at all, which made her look more uncertain than he had ever seen her. She saw him and didn't move. She let him come to her. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I resigned this morning," she said. "I tore up the statement in front of the full board and handed Gerald my key card." Damon looked at her. "Vivian, I'm not asking you to feel responsible for that," she said. "I need you to understand it had nothing to do with you asking me to leave. It had everything to do with me sitting in that room holding a pen, reading a document that called you an isolated incident." She paused. "You are not an isolated incident, and I was done letting other people write the version of my life that was most convenient for them. That company is everything you built. I kept my shares. I kept my seat. Gerald gets the chair he's been angling for since my father died, and when he inevitably burns it down, I'll still be in the room." She said it without bitterness, just precision. "I know what I'm doing. I've always known what I'm doing. The question is whether I'm brave enough to do it." He looked at her for a long moment. The street was quiet around them. Someone's sprinkler was running 2 houses down. A dog was barking somewhere. "It's been 2 months," he said. "We've had 2 cups of coffee and 1 evening in my apartment." "I know. That's not enough time. I spent 40 months with someone I thought I knew," she said, "and understood by the second week that I'd been wrong. I have spent 8 weeks with you, and I have not once felt like I needed to perform anything." She looked at him directly the way she had looked at him the first night, not calculating, not performing, just looking. "I'm not saying I know everything. I'm saying I know enough to know I don't want to walk away from it." He looked at her for another moment. The street was still quiet. The sprinkler had stopped. He thought about the night in the suite, about how she had laughed at the question about flowers having feelings, how the sound of it had caught him off guard, how he had driven home afterward and sat in the parking lot of his building for 5 minutes before going inside because he hadn't wanted to lose the feeling yet. He had told himself it didn't mean anything. He had told himself that more than once since then. The school bell rang. A moment later, the front doors opened and children began streaming out. Damon watched the door. Then Zoe appeared, backpack bouncing, searching the gate line for him, and saw Vivian first. She stopped, looked at her father, looked at Vivian. Then she walked over with the measured restraint of someone trying very hard not to run. "Did you come back?" she asked Vivian. Vivian crouched down to her level. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd like to." Zoe turned to Damon with an expression that contained approximately no patience for adult hesitation. Damon looked at his daughter, at the gap where her front tooth used to be, at the drawing she had put in the drawer without saying a word. He looked at Vivian, still crouched on the sidewalk outside an elementary school in her board meeting suit, waiting. He reached out and took her hand. Zoe threw both arms around Vivian's neck before anyone said another word, and Vivian held on, and Damon stood there in his warehouse clothes in the afternoon sun, thinking that he had been so careful for so long, and careful had never once felt like this. The wedding was small by any standard, and enormous by the one that mattered. They held it in the garden behind a flower shop on Clement Street, not the Ashford Grand. Not a venue with a waiting list, just a narrow yard with string lights and folding chairs, and a jasmine vine that had been growing along the back fence for longer than either of them had been alive. 40 people. Family, a few close friends, Zoe's teacher, who had become a quiet constant in their lives over the preceding weeks. Damon's cousin Marcus drove 6 hours from Atlanta and cried during the vows, and then spent the rest of the evening pretending he hadn't. Zoe wore a pink dress she had chosen herself and carried a basket of rose petals that she distributed with great ceremony and uneven spacing. Halfway down the makeshift aisle, she looked back at Damon standing at the end of it and gave him a thumbs up. He laughed. He hadn't expected to laugh at his own wedding, but there it was. Vivian came through the garden gate in an ivory dress with no train, no veil, nothing that would make it harder to move. She had done her own hair. She carried a single stem of white ranunculus, not traditional, chosen because she liked it, because she had spent enough years doing things for other people's reasons. When she reached Damon, she said quietly before the officiant began, "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "You? Better than I've been in a long time." They got married under the jasmine vine while Zoe stood between them and held both their hands during the vows, which was not in the program, but which no one stopped. Gerald Ashford sat in the CEO chair for 93 days. On the 94th, an internal audit uncovered evidence that he had been sharing confidential development plans with a competing hotel group for the better part of 2 years. The subsequent investigation expanded. Gerald was removed from the board, stripped of his shares under the fraud clause in his contract, and handed to his own lawyers. Vivian did not issue a statement. When her assistant asked if she wanted to, she said she was busy. She was in the backyard teaching Zoe how to press flowers between the pages of a heavy book. Damon opened Wrong Room Flowers 4 months after the wedding. The name had been Zoe's idea, delivered at breakfast one morning, with the confidence of someone who considered the matter settled. He had looked at Vivian across the table. She had shrugged. She's not wrong. The shop was small, a corner space 2 blocks from their house, with good light in the mornings and a small chalkboard out front that Zoe updated every few days with varying degrees of spelling accuracy. Damon ran it the way he had always worked, carefully, consistently, with attention to the thing in front of him. He made arrangements the way he had made them on night shifts in the rain, like they were going to someone who needed them. Vivian used her shares, her contacts, and 12 years of operational knowledge to build something she called the Renee Carter Fund, named with Damon's permission and Zoe's enthusiastic approval, given in the form of an immediate and emphatic yes, before anyone had finished explaining what it was. The fund provided emergency housing assistance, child care subsidies, and job placement support for single parents navigating the kind of financial edge Damon had been living on the night he knocked on the wrong door. In its first year, it served over 200 families across the city. In its second year, Vivian hired a director to run it full-time so she could focus on building the next one in a different city. Zoe had a corner of the flower shop designated as her gallery. New drawings rotated in and out every few weeks. The oldest one, the house with the yard, the tree, the dog, the figure she had added in pencil beside her father and herself, was framed and hung at the center, the permanent piece around which everything else was arranged. She had written a title along the bottom in careful block letters, My Family. On a night in November, rain coming down the way it had the first time Damon was locking up the shop, when Vivian appeared at the door. She was holding a bunch of red roses. She held them out with a look on her face that meant she thought she was being funny. "You sure you know which room these go to?" He took the roses out of her hand, pulled her in out of the rain, and kissed her in the doorway of the shop with the lights still on behind them. "I knocked on the wrong door," he said, "and found everything I was looking for." Zoe materialized from the back of the shop. She had been there the whole time, finishing a drawing, and wrapped both arms around the two of them from behind. And the three of them stood there in the warm light while the rain came down outside. A family assembled from a misread number and a wet November night, and one door that opened when it wasn't supposed to. Some people spend their whole lives being careful. Careful with their hearts, careful with their hopes, careful not to want too much. Damon was one of those people. And honestly, who could blame him? He had a daughter to raise, bills to pay, and a world that had already told him more than once to know his place. But here's what this story keeps coming back to. The most important things in life rarely arrive on schedule. They show up at the wrong door, in the wrong weather, at the worst possible time. A misread number, a bouquet of roses, a woman who opened the door instead of closing it. Damon didn't find love because he went looking for it. He found it because he kept showing up for his daughter, for his work, for the small daily act of keeping things together when everything was pulling them apart. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a door opened that wasn't supposed to. Maybe yours will too. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone you've been too careful about, or something you've been too afraid to reach for, then you're in the right place. We tell stories like this every week. Real emotions, real choices, real people trying to figure out what love looks like when life gets in the way. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.